Okay, after some fiddling, it's firing on most revolutions, so you can hear it fire. And you want it a little bit rich, and like I said, you want to tighten this very, very little. Be very careful. It's just brass. I'm going to put one cylinder back into the rotation here. Make sure the little spacer goes back in right, and like I said, get this screw aligned properly. Do not want to cross thread that. You might actually use a little bit of lubricant on it. On a side note, if you adjust these rod ends, you can actually change the compression and timing a little bit. I would leave them the way they are if the engine's running, but just not running as well as you'd like. You can also take this valving off. This unscrews from the head, and there's a little set screw on here, a little set screw here. That all slides out, and you can spin it to see if there's a spark inside there without taking the spark plug out. That little jet in there, the brass jet, will come out of there, because this will unscrew off the top of here. Use carburetor cleaner or brake cleaner or something that'll evaporate quick to clean that out if there's something plugging the jet. It's a very small jet. So let's see here. See, it'll almost run on 2 cylinders. Yeah, there it's running on 2 cylinders. If you can get it to run on 2 cylinders, you know those 2 cylinders are adjusted well. And like I said, you may have to richen it up a little bit, because if you're running on 2 cylinders, you're not consuming as much fuel. You get all 4 fire, and you may run it a little lean. Let's see here. This one's a little tricky to get in here. My big fingers. Rotate that in there. Pull the cylinder down a little bit. And you can add these in one at a time and test run it. To make sure that each cylinder is firing properly. You always want to watch your fuel level here too, because it may indicate high, but as soon as you turn the fuel on, if it drops to low, that just means there's gas in there rather than the liquid that turns the gas, the butane, and you may need to put a little more butane in it. Okay, let's see here. I was playing with this one a little bit. So let's see if, hopefully I didn't mess that one up. It's running pretty good. So we'll put the last one on. It's much easier to diagnose what's wrong on each individual cylinder. So don't be afraid to disconnect all of the 3 cylinders and work them one at a time. If you can't get it to run at all, you work it one at a time. And if that one, you can't even get that one to fire, or any of them to fire, check spark. This little piezoelectric element doesn't last forever. They last a long time, but every once in a while one will fail. And obviously if the gas is not making it to the cylinder, if you don't hear a hiss when you turn it on, that's an issue. And that little valve in here that closes it off doesn't have a spring in it. The pressure of the gas pushes it out and closes that valve. So if that stays open, you're basically flooding the engine, and there's not enough air to butane mixture to fire. And you just take that top part off of there, take the little valve out of there, be careful with it, and spray it off with some carburetor cleaner, or some, you can use a little bit of denatured alcohol, and then put a little bit of light lubricant on it, or like a silicone lubricant, to let it slide in there when the pressure of the gas is coming through. Let's see if this thing will run now. Once it warms up, it'll run a little better. It actually runs a little smoother once it warms up with a little bit of load on the flywheel. And they're all getting pretty warm now. Be careful, these exhausts do get hot. You can burn your fingers on it. A little bit of load, you can hear them all hit. You can play with it and see how low you can get it to idle. But this fuel, the way the butane works, it's almost off. You need to idle pretty low. If you go much lower than that, the flywheel won't carry it through. It's a nice little idle there. You know it's running real, firing every time when you can get it to idle that low. Here, hitting on all 4 cylinders now. It'd take almost nothing to run it after you get it heated up. So most of what you have to look at when a cylinder isn't firing is from here up. This part from here down, you very rarely have an issue with that. You can check the spark plug, see if you have a spark. I wouldn't take these spark plugs in and out too much. I would take this valving off the top and look down for the spark, because these have a little split end, and if you don't get them threaded just right, you can kind of mess up the threads going into the head here. And of course you can take the rods off with these Allen head screws here. That helps you pull it down to 1 cylinder so you can do your diagnostics on each individual cylinder. Just makes so much makes it so much easier to figure out if you remove some of the elements from what you're trying to figure out. And if you take the valve tube off, the fuel tube off, gas tube off, inside there's a little rubber O-ring that goes over this brass tube. As soon as you take the nut off of here, slide this nut off, take that little O-ring and put them in a little bowl or something, because they are incredibly easy to lose. You can find them at the hardware store or something. Depending on what kind of hardware stores you have, they are quite tiny. And the other main issue is this little adjuster. You're basically adjusting your mixture with this screw. This little slant here determines when that valving opens. You want the valve to close, but you don't want it to be closed for too long. You want this to come down and push that valving open. So you can adjust that. This here, basically the rocker arm that opens the valve, when you're at bottom dead center, or you're at the bottom of the stroke, that should be almost totally compressed. Don't allow it to be totally compressed, because then you're putting a lot of force on this, and it's just not good for the engine, and it's going to stop it anyway. The engine doesn't produce a ton of power. It's advisable to put a little bit of oil on these rods, and you put a little white lithium grease or some grease down in here to keep this lubricated. But after you're done running it, you might take a little cloth and just wipe some of the residue off so it doesn't get all messy.